Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching the trial. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's see what happens.
I am harassed, humiliated, threatened every single day. Even just walking into this courtroom, sitting here in front of the world, having the worst parts of my life, things I've lived through, used to humiliate me. People want to kill me.
Yeah, I don't doubt anything she's saying. In fact, I'm 100% sure that I've seen what she's referring to. Not the threats to kill her, but I don't doubt it. I mean, I am a minor part of this whole media situation, and I am afraid for my life at times. I haven't received any death threats, thank God, but at least recently regarding this trial. But I can't imagine what she's going through, and has been even before the trial. And I know that some people will say, well, she deserves it because she lied and that's what you get. I don't agree. I think if you lie, you deserve to be sued, potentially. I agree that there should be justice, and I agree that there should be deterrence for others who are going to lie. But even if you believe the full pro-Johnny Depp narrative, that does not justify death threats. It doesn't justify attacking her personally, making her feel unsafe, yelling at her in public. I mean, to me, it's like, do people not understand that she's being humiliated anyway? You don't need to add on to it by yelling at her on the streets. There are reasons that people should be harassed. People should be yelled at. People who commit mass murder, people who pollute the environment and use their billions of dollars to support the conspiracy theories that support their polluting of the environment and making a lot of money. Certain politicians who invade other countries and commit atrocities, those people deserve to be ridiculed. Amber Heard does not deserve that ridicule, that harassment. And I've been saying this from the beginning-ish, that I'm worried and more certain that in 10 years, maybe even just 5 years, maybe even just a couple years, we will look back at everything that happened during the trial. We will see that misogyny was in the air and that some of us might have participated in it, whether we will acknowledge that or not. But when we look back at Monica Lewinsky, when we look back at Anita Hill, when we look back at Britney Spears, it's clear that misogyny was at play in the media for everyone, for people of all genders. Participating in misogyny and sexism always happens, and when there are lightning rod events like this, it attracts all that sexism and misogyny. There's a lot of anger towards women. There's a lot of hatred towards women. There's a lot of judgment towards women. Some criticism or evaluation of the situation is absolutely warranted and probably socially responsible, but the amount of hatred towards her and the dismissiveness, the weird conspiracy theories that would crop up that are born out of misogyny. The ideas that she was posing for a picture. I didn't see any talk around Johnny Depp along those lines. And there's things that Johnny Depp did during this trial that could have absolutely been highlighted. Like, there's this footage of Johnny Depp and his security person pulling up outside the courthouse, I believe, and all of his fans are like, "We love you, Johnny." And he's just hanging out of the window, like just kind of smiling at everyone. And on one hand, you'd say, well, you know, he's being nice to his fans and he likes the support, and who wouldn't? On the other hand, it looks kind of thirsty, and I didn't see it that way. But if Amber Heard did something like that, just imagine if Amber Heard had pulled up to the courthouse, was hanging out the window and smiling at everyone, how much anger and hatred and threats she would get because of that. Whereas Johnny Depp's, it was considered, at least by the media that I saw, a cute moment with Johnny Depp. Now again, people would say Johnny Depp was not a problem in this case, and she is, in a sense, kind of a criminal. Not a criminal, but she did something wrong and therefore deserves our hatred or something. Anyway, my point is that misogyny is at play. When there's an excuse from our society to hate a woman, all that misogyny just gets expressed, again, from people of all genders. the interpretation of her statements. Again, if you believe that she is an abusive, horrific human being, there's not a lot of evidence to refute that. There's a ton of evidence to support your evaluation that Amber Heard is someone that you would not want to be friends with, someone that everyone should avoid being in a relationship with, that kind of thing. And if she reminds you of someone that abused you and you have a lot of anger towards her, that's rational, that makes sense. But just remember that a lot of other people are having those feelings too, and if a million people have that collective anger towards her, and then say 1% decide to actually go after her, which would be, what, 10,000 people, then that's 10,000 people a day that are actively trying to kill her and harass her and steal from her and, hack into her phone or tell lies about her. It's a lot of people. So, your anger in all likelihood is justified. Now, I know there are people that think she's being unfairly accused of things and that they believe that she's a victim, which there's evidence of that as well. So my point is that there's a big difference between being triggered, and there's a big difference between feeling like she did something wrong and talking with your friends about how much you hate her. And there's a big difference between going after her, yelling at her in the street, death threats, trying to, eliminate her from the planet, or I don't know, just all those kinds of things. I mean, just think about all the criminals that have committed greater crimes than her that don't experience any of that because, one, they're not famous, and two, they're not a woman. So it's just something that I'm sure we will look back on. In fact, I'm already looking back on it, even though the verdict was just a couple weeks ago, and thinking, ick. It's not a huge part of it. I think most of the rhetoric online around the trial has not exhibited that. But the more I hear all the testimony, the more some of the allegations, say 10%, seem credible. I don't know, but the multiple accounts from multiple people, Ellen Barkin, Johnny Depp's past old friend that he used to play in a band with and drink and party with, lots of people reporting that Johnny Depp is absolutely one of the most jealous people you'll ever meet. Paranoid, worried, some self-awareness on his part, but you add in alcohol and other substances and that tendency to express his attachment and security through that paranoid jealousy. I have no doubt that he was jealous. I have some minor doubt, but I wouldn't be surprised. If I had to put my money down on something, I would say that for the most part, at least, all the allegations of him talking about his jealous thoughts and trying to get under her skin regarding, like, you're going to wear that thing, or you're going to work at that job, you're going to work with that actor, and that person's going to try to get with you. Like, that all seems absolutely credible. And I'm also starting to believe some of the accounts that he did hit her and the wounds to her face that the makeup artist said. So to just completely discount that entirely, I absolutely can understand the jury believing some of those accounts and yet finding her liable, because the statement in the media was not only that she was a victim of abuse full stop without also being abusive herself, but also that she was a victim of sexual assault, which those accounts are almost impossible to corroborate because they happen behind closed doors. There's no physical evidence, and you can't take a picture of something like that even if you tried, unless it was in the moment, right? And who can do that? So I think most people don't think she's telling the truth around that. They believe that she took one story from Ms. James, and then the other story of the cavity search. It's hard. Most people I talk to, even pretty level-headed people, think that she's lying about that, but who knows? Those things could have happened. I think that there's a level-headed way of looking at this and concluding that Amber Heard lied for the most part, that she should be held liable, that she should be criticized, that she either knowingly lied or has some disorder that compels her to lie and believe her lies. Either way, she's a menace to society or something like this, and Johnny Depp deserves justice. There's an absolute level-headed way of approaching it that way, but the tone that people will have, other clips, that people would show, like the posing for a picture. Lots of people were convinced she was using coke on the stand, which I just thought to be one of the the dumbest things people could think, honestly. It's like, why would she do that? One. And two, I'm always like, well, who cares if she uses cocaine? Like, what does that mean? They all admitted to using cocaine. I highly doubt that she would use it in the middle of the hearing as she's on the stand. But even if she did, what's the diff? It's just a drug. Like, let it go, people. Anyway, not that I'm promoting drug use. I mean, because again, the way they talk about it, it's like, oh, you know, she's using drugs, or I don't know, just the tone. And then there was this other video going around where people had zoomed in on the camera. The camera didn't zoom in, but they zoomed in on the video footage, which was very grainy, by the way, because you're zooming in. And they were positive that she was not actually taking notes, that she was faking taking notes, but her pen wasn't actually hitting the page. And this clip was going around everywhere too. Like, oh, look at her. She's not even. And the first time I saw it, I'm like, oh, it does look like she's not touching the page. But then I thought about it and I was like, well, one, why would she do that? People are standing right there. She knows she's on camera. Two, the footage is so grainy and the tip of the pen is probably a similar color to the legal pad that she's writing on. And so it just looked like she wasn't touching the page when she actually was. So just a lot of that sort of stuff. And there's almost none of that rhetoric around Johnny Depp. You could absolutely be upset at him just for the things that he admitted that he did. Do you know what I mean? It's not like Johnny Depp is this angel, right? We understand that. So they're both prone to abuse. They've both admitted to abuse. That doesn't mean Johnny Depp should be vilified or hated in a similar way, I suppose, because it seems that he wasn't as bad, but he wasn't good. Like, there were issues, there were problems that he admitted. So when I hear her talk about the suffering that she's gone through, yeah, I don't doubt that at all. And now, we don't necessarily say, well, let's protect Amber Heard. I mean, at the very least, we should say, stop that. Don't bully her. Don't bully Dr. Spiegel. Don't bully Dr. Hughes. Just don't. Don't bully them. It's not okay. But the larger issue is, for all women, when we look at a situation like this, think about our own misogyny, regardless of what gender you are. You have been indoctrinated into a sexist society, and the way you come across and the thoughts that you have, we should all just be aware of that, right?
And they tell me so every day. People want to put my baby in the microwave, and they tell me that. Johnny threatened, promised me that if I ever left him, he'd make me think of him every single day that I lived.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive.
That doesn't sound likely. Could be, maybe when he was intoxicated or something, but she's saying that if they broke up, he was going to make her think of him every day. It's interesting because the way that it looks, it seems like the opposite, right? That Johnny Depp doesn't like to be in the media and doesn't like that kind of thing where you have those public fights. And so if anyone was keeping it going, it was her, by continuing to be interviewed, going on the press, voluntarily writing op-eds in the Washington Post and so on. If anyone, it was her. That I don't think she was doing it to keep him thinking about her. I think in all likelihood she was very upset and hurt and still playing out those kinds of feelings through hostility towards him, and probably believed a lot of the things that she was saying.
In the harassment and the humiliation, the campaign against me that's echoed every single day on social media and now in front of cameras.
Yeah, and I've been saying this from the beginning as well, or at least since she started testifying, or maybe before actually, when, even from the very beginning, because where I jumped in on the trial was with Dr. Curry, and hearing her evaluation and the 3-6 and the borderline and histrionic diagnoses, and watching Amber Heard listen to the testimony, I have been from the beginning worried about her health and her life, honestly, because if the borderline borderline diagnosis is accurate, which it very well could be, anything close to this, like a minor trial along these lines, could be devastating emotionally for people like this. This is the trial of the decade. This is one of the biggest media moments in the history of the United States, of the world, perhaps. Everyone is paying attention to this, and the vast majority of people think she's an absolute monster. And just think about it, because like she'll be up there with Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and these kinds of people, and it's like, should she be? I don't know. Maybe you think she should. I don't. I think Harvey Weinstein is way, Jeffrey Epstein, these kinds of people. When you have the relational traumas, that is where borderline generates from, you, as I've been saying from the beginning and from the beginning of my career and the beginning of this podcast 14 years ago, have a lot of possibility of being triggered, not by choice, obviously, but due to neurology and brain development and personality development. And the amount of betrayal and rejection that she's going through, and then you got to think people surrounding her might also be rejecting her because of this. I don't know. It's got to be massively triggering. Now, if you hate her, you're like, well, you deserve it. This is what you get. Okay. But I've been from the beginning concerned that she might die. She could either sabotage herself or harm herself somehow, and I'm legitimately concerned about that. Best case scenario, over the next 20 years, which I could see happening, she recovers from her borderline and maybe still hates Johnny Depp and everything surrounding that, but manages to get some insight and some healing and is better off for it, and people around her are better off for it. I wouldn't doubt that. She's been through a lot of therapy. She likes to go to therapy. So, there's a path forward for her of redemption that is absolutely possible. Johnny Depp, too. He's got a lot of issues as well. A lot of addiction issues, a lot of trauma issues for himself, jealousy issues, attachment insecurity issues.
Yes, that's effectively what happened, yeah.
You testify that he actually grabbed that woman's wrist and twisted it, right?
And told her that he could effectively break her wrist by saying he knew how many pounds of pressure, or asking her how many pounds of pressure it took to break a human wrist.
But your own witness, your former best friend, Rocky Pennington, she didn't corroborate that, did she?
I'm not quite sure what part of that night she saw. There were a lot of people there.
All right, yeah, so that's a good point for Cross to bring up. I don't know if I reacted to that, but her former best friend, which we could imagine why that would be if we believe Dr. Curry's assessment and some of the allegations from Johnny Depp's team as to why someone might have a hard time staying friends with Amber Heard. But also, we heard from Rocky that she didn't see that or wasn't aware of it or something. It's possible that she just didn't see it or something. Be hard to believe, though, because that would be a pretty shocking thing. But who knows?
Again, I don't know what Rocky saw. There were a lot of people there that night.
You testified that once you brought Mr. Depp back to your trailer, he trashed it, correct?
That is correct.
And the manager of the Hicksville trailer park was furious that Johnny had wrecked the whole thing. Do you remember that testimony?
That's correct.
Well, we heard from that manager of the Hicksville trailer park, Morgan Knight, on Monday, didn't we?
I'm not quite sure who that guy was or if he had any involvement in this. I know a lot of people have come out of the woodwork to be involved.
So you're accusing Mr. Knight of testifying and committing perjury?
I'm not accusing anyone. I just don't recognize that man.
Just masterful work there by Camille. So with just a simple question, because the way Amber Heard phrased it was also skillful, but just lobbing a ball across the plate for Camille. Amber Heard had claimed during this party that they had, which they all rented trailers, and they were like out in the desert or something, it sounded like, and it was like camping, but you all get your own camper. It sounded very fancy. And Amber Heard was saying, and I think the friend, maybe it was the friend, was saying that there was a huge fight between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and that Johnny Depp had trashed one of the trailers, and then they had the manager who came on the scene into the trailer right after Johnny Depp and Amber Heard had left and said that there was, I believe what he said was, there was a sconce on the ground that frequently falls off the wall anyway. So there was nothing wrong with the trailer, and that throws things into question. And what Amber Heard is saying, and I think Elaine was kind of saying as well, of just like, oh, you're here for your 15 minutes of fame, which must be a strategy that they have. It's just like, oh, okay, that's how we'll discredit these people. Which, if that's the argument, you could discredit everyone. You could discredit anyone who testifies for Amber Heard. They're there for their 15 minutes of fame. Anyone who testifies against Amber Heard, 15 minutes of fame. I don't think it really is convincing. Elaine was going after the TMZ guy with that strategy. Amber Heard was talking crap about Kate Moss coming out of the woodwork or something. So I think it's some sort of strategy either they work together on or they just independently developed, but I don't think any of that is landing. I mean, Kate Moss did not seem to be there because she wanted to be there. Plus, she's an extremely famous person and doesn't need to be. I mean, as far as I understand, she's super famous. That's not really my thing. But the TMZ guy didn't seem like he was there for his 15 minutes. The manager, it's unclear. I mean, they did point out that he was on Twitter chiming in about it, but who knows? It didn't seem very credible. I watched an interview on a channel I think called the DUI Lawyer or something, in which they interviewed that guy from TMZ, and he gave a very convincing narrative that he's a very introverted person who isn't interested in that kind of stuff. He doesn't like to do that kind of thing, and so the only reason why he agreed to do it was because he believed the truth needs to be out there.
You heard Mr. Knight testify that it was actually you who was upset with Mr. Depp spending time away from him. Isn't that correct?
How would he know? He wasn't there.
You heard Mr. Knight testify that it was actually you who was yelling at Mr. Depp.
Again, I've heard a lot of people say a lot of things to be involved in the Johnny Depp show, but he wasn't there.
It's not hard to believe anyway. Now, who knows with the credibility of this random employee, but does anyone doubt that Amber Heard might have been yelling at Johnny Depp in this moment, given what we heard on the audio tape?
On behalf of Mr. Depp and all my colleagues at Brown Rednick, I want to thank you deeply for your time and your service over these last 7 weeks. We understand that it probably has not been convenient for you to be here every day.
Okay, I have finished the trial. I watched all of the testimony. I even went back through all the videos of all the testimony just to make sure I didn't catch something. I did take some notes here as I was watching for the past, I don't know, number of hours. A friend, Io, a friend of Amber Heard, and later became a friend of Johnny Depp as well, but mainly was a friend of Amber Heard. He said that Johnny Depp was terrible to Amber Heard and anyone considered an enemy. So Io seemed like a credible person. He had a lot of things to say about both people, so it seemed credible to some extent. But he said that Johnny Depp would say terrible things about Amber Heard when Amber Heard was bothering him, and he would say terrible things about anyone that Johnny Depp considered an enemy. And according to him, Johnny Depp had a lot of enemies, so to speak, in his mind, which lends itself to the possibility that Johnny, because we never heard of any evaluation personality-wise regarding him, because he didn't need to subject himself to an evaluation psychologically. But he does fit a profile of someone who actually could be considered on the borderline spectrum. I can't know that for sure, and there's not a lot of strong evidence about that. But I've been referring to him as exhibiting attachment insecurity, which can manifest in a lot of different personality disorders or subclinical personality disorders. And some of the things that he exhibited regarding jealousy, which sounds very credible given the multiple accounts about him from people in his court and people in Amber Heard's court. There's an audio recording of him admitting that he gets jealous and gets very intense with his jealousy. I think he uses the word insane or something like that when he gets jealous. So that is a sign of preoccupied attachment, if not borderline personality disorder. Now, I don't want to say that that's a strong speculation as an hypothesis for his personality by any means, but one of the the things about preoccupied attachment, and borderline and preoccupied attachment you could consider to be a Venn diagram with a lot of overlap. And for people with preoccupied attachment, they'll get very jealous and will get intensely jealous at times and will resort to ways of coping with that jealousy because they are suffering greatly. That can involve control. That can involve a lot of substance abuse. Also, he had a lot of enemies and he would be very vicious towards those people. And when you have preoccupied attachment, and incidentally, when you have borderline personality disorder, or when you're on the spectrum somewhere and someone betrays you, you will become very triggered, very upset, as I've been talking about with Amber, and then you will turn on them in a very severe way. That temper tantrum he was throwing in the kitchen where he's slamming the cupboards could have been a manifestation of that. According to reports, he was upset about someone stealing a bunch of money from him or something. Of course, all of us would be upset in a situation like that and might slam some doors. But when we take everything into consideration, the multiple accounts of jealousy spanning several decades, Io also said that Johnny Depp was good to him at times, and also that he did exhibit paranoid jealousy, Johnny Depp. And Johnny Depp and Amber Heard were vicious with each other, so that lent credibility to Io, which everyone seemed to agree that they were pretty vicious towards each other, toward each other. And he also said that Johnny Depp would throw dishware, but was never violent with Amber Heard. We also heard from Ellen Barkin, a past partner of Johnny Depp, that Johnny Depp would throw bottles and whatnot when he was upset. So who knows about the credibility of that, but it's possible. Also, Amber Heard's friends had testified, a number of the friends testified that Johnny Depp was very intoxicated seemingly and became very aggressive and scary with Amber Heard. Didn't hit Amber Heard, but was, knocking down doors in their penthouse and saying, "Everyone get the hell out." And it was one guest in the penthouse was testifying that Johnny Depp was extremely scary and was intimidating and was intoxicated. So that's very possible. There's multiple people. They're all Amber Heard's friends, so you could say they're all lying. But I don't know. It stands to reason, given what we know factually about the case, Johnny Depp's own account of his substance use and audio recordings. It's absolutely possible, and it doesn't seem likely that the friends would make that sort of stuff up. Because if they were going to make something up, they would make up that he hit her. But they didn't make that up. They made up that he was very aggressive and chasing her. Now, if we knew the full picture, maybe she was aggressive with him for 90 minutes, and then for the last minute, he said, "That's enough," and decided to strike back somehow. That seems possible given the pattern that they would have. But it's also possible that he just flew off the handle and got aggressive. I don't see why people have a hard time imagining that. It's possible that it didn't happen, but anyway. So there was other testimony. I just watched the closing remarks. I don't know if that's what they call it, but the final speeches by all the lawyers. And I will say that it was interesting that to get all the information condensed down into these short-ish speeches from all the lawyers. And I will say that as the Amber Heard lawyers were laying out their case, it was a little bit compelling. There were arguments being made that I thought, yeah, I guess that does make sense. I mean, the overall thing that they were trying to say from the very beginning was, all you have to do is believe one allegation that Johnny Depp was abusive, including verbal abuse, and you throw this out because she wasn't lying if he ever abused her at all. So technically speaking, and according to many experts, a lot of attorneys were predicting that Amber Heard would absolutely win and that there was no way Johnny Depp could win this, were saying essentially that it's like, well, in the piece in the Washington Post, she doesn't go into detail. She just says that she was abused. And so if he ever was abusive at all, which probably did happen at some point, then she's not lying. The jury decided to look at it in a more, I think, common sense way, because that isn't really what she's saying. I don't think anyone interpreted that as Amber Heard was admitting, I'm not saying anything about my behavior. I might have been abusive too, but one time he abused me. Like, everyone understands that's not what she was saying. So in summary, I want to talk about Me Too a little bit. I've already talked about it a lot, and I feel a little obtuse because upon listening back to some of my reaction video statements, which again are never prepared, so I'm always just speaking off the top of my head, but I realized that I was characterizing Me Too as a general abuse victim movement, and it's not. It was originally and still is, I think, for most people, a sexual abuse victim movement, right? So if I implied somehow that it was broader than sexual harassment and sexual abuse, then that's me being obtuse because I'm just not always on the ball. But let's talk about Me Too for a second. And I know a lot of you understand this. I'm not a historian on this topic, but I was alive as all these things were happening. I've been treating victims and perpetrators for 25 years, and I also am interested in these kinds of things, and I've been talking about it on the podcast for many years as well. So I have at least some experience that I can pull from to provide the following summary. And I did sort of take some notes just to make sure that I follow along with my thought process. So in the past, and still now, but particularly in the past more so, when a victim of sexual harassment or abuse, so I guess what I'll talk about is just general abuse, including sexual abuse, because I think all that needs to be talked about in relation to this case. And so maybe I'll put aside the Me Too movement as a subset of this, but just the broader movement of victims' rights. So in the past, when victims came forward, which they almost never did because they absolutely understood that to do so would be social suicide because they knew that no one would believe them and they'd be victim shamed. And it still happens today. It was a lot more prevalent in the past. And there were very few systems in place to actually assist victims as they were coming forward. But say 20 years ago, 50 years ago, when a victim came forward, they were not believed typically. In fact, I have a hard time remembering a case where anyone was sort of universally believed. You know, I think of Anita Hill. It was a sexual harassment against one of the current Supreme Court judges, Clarence Thomas, and other kind of people. You know, Monica Lewinsky didn't claim abuse or didn't claim harassment, but of course that's how we see it now. And that does illuminate the fact that we didn't know much about sexual harassment back then, or didn't know enough, such that Monica Lewinsky herself didn't even recognize that that was something that might be happening. Anyway, so 20 years ago, 50 years ago, if a victim came forward, no one would believe them. They might even be punished or ostracized or accused of a crime themselves because they would be accused of lying or something like that. There would be intimidation and lawsuits and all sorts of things by the systems in the justice system and among police officers, at the workplace, and the newspapers, in your social circle, in your family, and it kept victims silent. And perpetrators just kept on perpetrating. And there are many reasons for that historically. One is sexism and misogyny, because men were often the ones perpetrating these crimes. And when another group threatens the in-group of men who are in power completely, all the politicians, all the police officers, all the bosses, they're all men, and a woman from the outside comes in and starts accusing, a lot of the men, and it's still true to this day, start to worry, even though they're not the ones that committed the crime, they start to worry like, well, what if I get accused of something like that? You know what? And this is just me hypothesizing, but a lot of men would just default to, well, let's just not believe her. Let's put her down because we might be protecting a perpetrator, but sort of indirectly, I'll be protecting myself from any kind, because I want the freedom to be able to do whatever I want to women. And most men wouldn't do horrible things to women, but there's still that fear, right? And you still see that today where the Me Too movement will come out and suddenly all these men are just like, well, what? I can't even like talk to a woman? And it's just like, no, that's not. Are you listening to what the Me Too movement is about? Like, it's not about you talking to a woman. It's about harassment and understanding power and privilege and gender politics. You know, it's just bizarre. But anyway, so in the past there was that. Also, we come from a Victorian culture in which all sexuality is shamed. And we still see this today in our society, but it's more prevalent in some other societies where someone comes forward, or not even comes forward, but is identified as a victim of assault sexually. and they're blamed. They're the ones that get stoned in the street and that kind of thing. And it's just like, how, because misogyny runs deep and it runs long. And so anyway, so there are other reasons as well, but there was this systemic, all-encompassing movement to oppress victims. And so victims learned, never come forward. And if they did, they would bump up against maybe a friend or a parent and say, no, don't come forward because you are going to regret it. It's just better to keep it to yourself. And that was the way it was for a long time. As we started to wake up, as feminism and activism and people in my field in psychology kept researching this, kept pushing forward, kept trying to raise awareness. And I'll tell you, in the beginning, in the 90s, when I started to do this work, I didn't get a lot of smiles. I didn't get a lot of agreement from people. There was a lot of pushback from people, again, particularly men. And so we've been at it for a long time to try to wake people up to this reality. And it started to work through the 90s, through the 2000s, through the teens. And then the Me Too movement happened in the late teens, which was a part of that movement. It bothers me that sometimes people think the Me Too movement started in 2016, but the movement for victims' rights and feminism it spans centuries, if not millennia. So it's been going on, and all those people have been working hard to push forward the idea, to reach out to victims, to push against perpetrators, to change the system, to get elected into office, to teach in their classrooms about these topics, to speak out in their workplace. It's been going on for a very, very long time. And so all those people deserve all the credit, And so we started to see that change. The awareness starts to grow. And then Me Too movement happens, and a lot of people start coming forward. A lot of people say Me Too, from famous people to not famous people. And it gives me chills just thinking about the glory of that, the bravery and the change that was happening in the air around that time. It was amazing. And there were these stories that stories start coming out of like, and it was happening all over the place, but there were some famous examples where there were 30 women that stepped forward publicly and give a statement that that famous guy has been sexually harassing or raping people for decades. Harvey Weinstein, these kinds of people. And then all of these people just start getting identified, right? And you're just like, whoa, him, Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, Bill O'Reilly, R. Kelly. I don't know if R. Kelly was exactly Me Too, but I think it was part of that growing awareness. Now, Roman Polanski I wrote down, but I think people have been screaming about him for many years. Woody Allen, Kevin Spacey, Andy Dick, Jeffrey Tambor, Louis C.K., Bill Cosby, I think is also kind of in there as well. It started to become very known, even to misogynists that I would see in my personal life and professional life, that, wow, wait. So, and there were two types of men I found. There were the men who were not misogynistic, but unaware, which is still kind of a crime, but what are you going to do? And then there were the other men who were just flat out sexist. So there were a lot of men who were unaware, and you could say like by choice they were avoiding the topic for their entire life, and then suddenly they hear these stories because it was just, story after story after story, and not just like identifying the perpetrator, but it was telling the whole story. It was like, I came forward and I was rejected. This person came forward, they were rejected. No one believed us. Then 10 years later, just hearing it's not like people were cowering in a corner. It's like a lot of people were coming forward. People were believing them, writing them up in the press, and yet Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and all these people, just their careers just truck along, and the vast majority of the public says, well, that's probably not true. It's probably just someone looking for money and all that kind of stuff. And so there were a lot of people suddenly aware of something that happens all the time, and that they might be complicit in or even participating in minor microaggressions in the workplace regarding sexism. And it was important, it was good. And then there was this movement to believe victims and say, hey, we have to reprogram ourselves. We have to fight against people who disbelieve. We have to change the system. We got to change the criminal. We got to retrain all the police officers and the investigators, maybe the judges, lawyers, politicians. Everyone has to be reprogrammed. and we said, stop disbelieving. When someone comes forward, they probably are telling the truth because they have to go, even with Me Too and all the acceptance, they're probably there's going to be a net negative on their life when they come forward. Even though Me Too and all the things that we have done to create a welcoming environment for people to come forward, it's still a net negative on the average when people come forward. So there's a lot of reasons as to why people still won't come forward. And so why would someone want that? Why would someone want the net negative? Why would they make up a story to get that net negative, even though things are different and better than they were before? So we started to say, stop disbelieving. And if someone disbelieved, we would attack them. And it was just, and it was right, and it was good. But there was a simplistic conclusion from that, which was believe everyone, particularly women who come forward, which is, of course, not wise. So we did a good thing with Me Too. We did a good thing with awareness of intimate partner violence. We did a good thing by pushing for believing people who come forward. But we had one last little nuance to add, one asterisk, not a big one, but an asterisk, significant asterisk, that says some people lie. And we don't necessarily know if they're telling the truth. And since we live in a black and white society, everyone's like, well, what do I do? What do I do with that? Do I disbelieve them or believe them? And I'm like, it depends on your role. If they're your friend, then you believe them. Like, why would you disbelieve a friend? So this is, as I keep thinking about this and talking about this, if you have power over an outcome for everyone involved, then you need to be careful about whether or not you believe in your mind as to whether or not the allegations are true. You might listen, you don't necessarily have to So say, for example, you're a friend. Someone comes to you and says, this thing happened at work, I was harassed. You don't have any power. You're not HR, you're not the boss, you're not a shareholder, you're not a journalist. Your friend comes to you. Now, in your head, you might disbelieve them depending on your situation, but generally speaking, it's probably true. It's probably an accurate depiction. So you tend to believe, right? And there's no consequence to believing someone with that asterisk of they might be exaggerating or lying, right? If you are a journalist, then you have a responsibility because you might actually harm someone. If you're a therapist and it's individual therapy and someone comes to me, I don't have any control over what happens. So I tend to believe. There might be with some people, can't think of an instance where this would happen, honestly, because it's not typical that clients will lie to me, or they might exaggerate. I absolutely have seen that before and thought about it, but I won't say that in the moment I won't likely say it in the moment. But if it's family therapy and one person is saying another person in the room abused them, I have some power here, because if I believe or act like I believe, and it's possible that it's a lie, then I am adding credibility to the system, because I'm a professional, to the allegation. Now, usually the allegations are true. I don't say to the person coming forward in family therapy, and this has happened, by the way, I think you're lying. I say, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about a way to get at how you can get safe regardless of what happened. Someone's probably going to say, well, are you telling the truth? And I'll be like, hey, let's wait off of that. I'll guide everyone through, maybe definitely get some individual therapy for both alleged perpetrator and victim, and start going down the road of figuring out what to do with this. There's a system, right? But you have to have that asterisk. So you don't have to be black or white. If you are a member of the public and you hear an allegation from someone like Amber Heard, now you might say, I don't have a responsibility because I don't have any control. That's true until you start speaking in public on Twitter and that kind of thing. Because when you speak in public in those arenas, it's like a vote. You're essentially participating in the online vote one way or the other, right? So if you hear from the next public figure you hear about who comes forward, and it will happen because it just is, the thing I keep reminding people is the Me Too movement didn't exhaust all of the people who haven't come forward. It's still a very small minority of people who come forward. The vast majority of people who have been sexually assaulted and harassed in the workplace in the United States since 2016 have still not come forward, even though we've had the Me Too movement. We have a long way to go. So the next time someone comes forward in the public, you can make your own decisions about whether or not you think it's true or not. You could be like, well, I hate him. I don't think it's true. Or oh, I think it, So, you can make your own choice, obviously. It doesn't really matter. But if you start going online and saying, like, I know that this happened, and we saw this a lot. I certainly saw it a lot with this case. People are like, I know that this happened. I mean, when I get people on either end of the bell curve saying, I know Johnny Depp is guilty, and on the other side, I know that Amber Heard is guilty, I'm like, and I'm the idiot, and they're trying to get me and destroy me in various different ways, in scary ways, honestly. I'm like, well, both of y'all are looking at the same data. Is it possible that no one knows what really happened? And I've been saying that from the beginning as well, or at least as I started to understand the situation, that most of the allegations, the bulk of the allegations, happened when they were the only ones there. And we hear one story from him and one story from her. And there's some credibility to both sides, and there are some dubious claims from both sides, particularly Amber Heard, but there's some dubious claims from him as well, particularly around he would minimize his substance use, which was pretty obvious to me. But anyway, which doesn't mean he was abusive, but it is that. Anyway, so they're the only ones that know. And she, if she suffers from what Dr. Curry talked about, could be massively distorted and remember things that literally did not happen. So she might not be a reliable narrator or rememberer as well. And he was highly intoxicated probably most of the time in this time span on multiple substances, according to his testimony. When they asked him about certain events and pictures, the way he responds, it's pretty clear. He's like, I have no idea. Like when the slamming of the cupboards, he's like, they're like, do you remember when this happened? He's like, I don't know. And just think about that. Like, either he did it routinely, or he was so intoxicated that he doesn't remember, or his brain is addled, or who knows. So I don't know what it all means, but the point is that there might be no one that knows what really happened, because the two people that were there were either too intoxicated, too brain damaged, or too personality disordered to be a reliable narrator. Point is that we now have this case, which furthers the Me Too movement and helps us to gain wisdom about the Me Too movement. I hope it doesn't set us back. We've been at this for millennia, right? Particularly in the last couple 100 years along these lines, and more in earnest in the last 50 years. But hopefully this is giving us that asterisk. It's giving us the ability to have a more wise, robust, nuanced approach to these situations, because there have been a number of people post Me Too, and maybe even before, who were accused of various different things, and then there was this immediate cancellation of that individual, the alleged perpetrator, and then later on we hear more of the story and realize, oh, we should not have canceled that person, which seems rather obvious to me. That why should we attack someone or ruin someone's career or their credibility or their livelihood just because one person said something? Now, we don't say, well, I'm skeptical of you coming forward. Just pump the brakes is the thing. There's usually isn't a need to suddenly do something about it, right? Because just imagine for yourself, if someone came forward and made up a lie about you. They could make up a lie about you from 20 years ago. You know, someone that you dated when you were 22 years old or something. And someone just decides to say something. Imagine if that unnuanced, unwise, unbridled cancellation and attacking happened to you. That would suck, obviously. So we don't want to do that to someone else. But if, when the data starts coming forward, or there's 50 victims or even 5 victims that come forward saying all the same story, and journalists that we can respect are reporting in along these lines, even without a conviction, because sometimes the statute of limitations, which is ridiculous, we can still say, okay, that person did something. I'm going to cancel them. I'm going to boycott them. I'm going to tweet about them. I'm going to speak out about them. But until there needs to be a threshold. It can't just be Amber Heard made these statements, therefore Johnny Depp needs to be canceled. Clearly, right? I mean, unless you believe everything Amber Heard says, then you think, sure, why not? But anyway, so I believe we have developed, we have matured, we have further refined, and there will be further refinements as we move forward. So that's how I see that. All right, so my take after reviewing all of the testimony and more has changed over time. I'll tell you, in the beginning, I was I was completely just ignorant. I didn't know what to think because I had no idea about Amber Heard and her allegations. I know some people knew about it. I knew that one audio clip from 3 years ago that I reacted to. I didn't follow any of the news or the tweets before and after. So at the beginning of the trial, I'm just like a blank slate. I'm like, I don't know. And that audio clip, I remember them talking about some things, but I'm sure there's a lot more to it. And as I started to hear the testimony from Johnny Depp's side, I was swayed because I was getting one side of the story. And that might have bothered some of you, I don't know. But it started to kind of affect my demeanor as I was reacting. And I wasn't very careful about believing things. No one was refuting what was happening yet. And so it just felt like, whoa, is that really what happened? Anyway, so then we got to the Amber Heard side of the trial where all of her testimony and all of the witnesses on her side. And I start to go, oh, okay, well, there is more to this story. So I start getting swayed that way. And I felt that way during the closing arguments that I just finished watching. That in the beginning, when the Johnny Depp team is giving their statements, it's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, there's it's clear lies. It just, And then the Amber Heard side starts to talk, and it's just like, well, there was this incident, there was that incident, there was this incident, and okay, fine, you can't see a bruise, but what does that mean? It does, so it was effective, and I was just, oh yeah, okay. Now, I at no point was like Amber Heard was a true victim, a sole victim, and her statements in public represent what happened. I never went there. It was more like when I started to go into Amber Heard's, and that's just my opinion, I wasn't there, but as I started to become more convinced of some of the Amber Heard testimony and narrative, it was more like, oh, okay, they both were clearly abusive, and that's basically where I landed, and that's kind of where I started instantly, if you remember way back when. And so I took some notes on my general take. Borderline seems like a strong conceptualization. And I want to remind everyone that the conceptualization, the label, the diagnosis of borderline isn't hard science. I know that a lot of forensic psychologists and other people in my field would claim it absolutely is a hard science. Experts in diagnosing that don't have a horse in the race regarding upholding the notion of hard science, they're not trying to push some book or something. People who are free to have an opinion, they all conclude and will say that all the labels in the DSM-5 are constructs, meaning that we as a field will construct a understanding of something. It's not a hard scientific thing. When you dig up rocks from the earth and break down the elements of silicon, whatever else is in there, you can actually measure there's this much silicon, there's this much oxygen, there's this much this kind of thing. And there are various different ways of triangulating those data and those findings. Lots of tests to provide that hard scientific data. So you then in the end say, okay, this clump of matter is made up of X amount of this, X amount of that, and X amount of this. That's hard science. Psychology is not. We can't take her head and open it up and say that about. There's just no. It's through interviews. We make a lot of assumptions about truthfulness and lies and exaggerations. We use testing, but the testing it's normed on other human beings, and there's statistical likelihoods. But the way that I've been phrasing it this whole way is, at least usually, is I hypothesize that if I were to assess Amber Heard, I would also conceptualize her as having borderline personality disorder. Does that mean she has borderline personality disorder? No. It just means that a lot of clinicians in my field, given what we saw in the trial and all the recordings and everything, would probably, after given time enough to actually diagnose properly, would probably find her to have borderline personality disorder. Am I diagnosing her from afar? No. I could be completely fooled by everything that was happening. I don't know. But there were a number of things that seemed to be strong indicators of borderline personality disorder. Is that the same as saying that that clump of rock is made out of iron? No. It is a conceptualization that is a way of guiding treatment, because when we have these labels, it helps us to know, okay, well then I need to do this type of treatment to help them with the goals that they have that they bring into therapy. If they're trying to improve their relationships, I have to understand maybe why they're having trouble. And so it seems like this is the best conceptualization. Let's try that out. Let's start treating her along those lines. And if she gets better, then maybe the conceptualization was right. Maybe it was wrong, and we just randomly picked a label that fit with a treatment protocol that actually worked for someone. And you just never know. And everyone that are experts on diagnosing understands that fully, because these people don't have a horse in the race. If you're a forensic psychologist, you have a horse in the race that are trying to push the idea of concrete science in this sort of area. But anyway, so I didn't think we would get so much data indicating borderline. When we first heard that from Dr. Curry, I was like, that's a pretty hard diagnosis to apply to someone after even only 13 hours. Because, the 13 hours involves all these other testing, and it's not just evaluating for borderline. It was a lot of different things. And so I was like, I don't know. But over and over and over again, in her own audio recordings, in other kinds of allegations, it just seemed very likely. Histrionic, much less data around that. And as I've been saying in other videos, I might, given what I've seen, might have like a histrionic asterisk around that, but probably wouldn't apply that unless I heard more information. Now, of course, what Dr. Curry would say is, well, she goes to the press, she wants attention, it's very clear. And okay, again, different clinicians can make cases for different things, but, and it's possible that if I were to evaluate her, but there was a lot less hard data around histrionic as there was for borderline. So there's that. PTSD, hard to know. She gave some testimony late in the trial that started to sound more like, oh wow, she's really sounding like someone that suffers from PTSD currently. She's talking about how she gets triggered while she's acting in a movie or something, and then she has to stop the whole production and cry in the bathroom. And in the way she described it, did start to sound like PTSD. Could she be lying? She could be. But I wouldn't be surprised that if she had PTSD, particularly from her childhood. She's been through a lot through her entire life. She's also been through a lot post-divorce that have nothing to do with Johnny Depp. So is the allegation, though, likely that she developed PTSD in relation to Johnny Depp? How do you know the thing? But anyway, so that one's hard to know. And as I've been saying from the beginning, a lot of people conceptually categorize borderline personality disorder as a form of trauma disorder, in that they were traumatized by abandonment and possibly abuse that felt like abandonment and betrayal. And thus, when there's abandonment and betrayal signals, the individual has a PTSD reaction, but it manifests in this borderline way because there are extra issues that are play with someone with borderline. So there's that. Anyway, and then with regards to Johnny Depp and his substance use, yeah, pretty severe. And the way he talks, even on the stand today, did not sound like someone that was going through or had ever gone through recovery, even in the slightest. I mean, and there was some other testimony, maybe by Io, I believe, that the treatment team for Johnny Depp, he was saying that that treatment team wasn't very good, like a scam or something. I don't know. He didn't go into detail, but I think what he was saying was he thought the treatment team was just kind of getting a lot of money from Johnny Depp and not really treating him in the way they would treat someone else. They weren't really holding him to the protocol of detox and sobriety they would with someone else. And it kind of sounded that way to me. I have no data to back that up, but I think they wanted really to help him with his opiate addiction, and I think they probably did help them with that because there were those detox protocols that were used and probably worked. But any addiction specialist would say, well, Johnny, you got to get rid of all this stuff. You've got to get rid of the alcohol and the marijuana, and you probably have to start looking at that Xanax and that ADHD med, because all those things, Xanax are downers and ADHD meds are uppers, and maybe you legitimately need those things, but we got to start looking at, and maybe they did, I don't know. But anyway, the way that Johnny Depp talked, it seems like if he wants to get better, he has a long road to go. One of his friends was saying that he doesn't want to, he doesn't believe in a higher power, and so that's why he doesn't go to AA. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from people. And for some reason, some people were thinking that I said or implied, and maybe I did, that the only way to get sober is through 12-step programs. I don't know if I was saying that in this series or another series. I don't believe that. That's absurd. But I do believe that, and I've worked with a lot of people at various different phases of recovery and addiction, and every single time that I talk with someone that is in early recovery or pre-recovery, and they tell me that they don't believe in AA or EDA, and they don't believe in a higher power, it's always a red flag that they're not really ready for sobriety, which is fine. I mean, it's them. But every single person that I've seen successfully go through recovery involved some form of free group meeting, whether it's a 12-step group, AA, NA, or one of the groups that don't involve a higher power, which they do exist, but some kind of ongoing system where you meet with your peers, talk about sobriety, or just listen and have sponsors and connections, and you get ideas and have that community and that inspiration to be sober. Are there isolated cases of people going cold turkey or doing some other method to become sober? Yeah, but tell you from personal experience, those don't usually last. People say, just while I'm on this topic, they'll identify research that says like AA has a terrible success rate. Well, everything has a terrible success rate because recovery is hard. So to say that AA has Alcoholics Anonymous has a terrible success rate, it's just like, well, show me an alternative. Give me something else that has a much higher success rate, and some people who have a horse in the race and they're trying to push something will claim that there's evidence that other things work, but I'm here to tell you that you might have temporary gains in some other protocols, but the people that I've seen that will actually recover, they go through these groups. And one of the first things I'll hear is, well, I don't believe in higher power. But further along in their recovery, they'll say, well, I still don't believe in a higher power because I'm an atheist, but I love going to AA because it's great. I mean, this perception that AA is like all about God or something, it depends on the group. Every group is different. Every group, it's not like AA is this monolith. Like every group has its own culture. You'll have one group where it's all Asian older guys who smoke cigarettes through the entire thing and they're trying to quit drinking. Another group are teenagers who listen to kid music the whole AA meeting or, part of the AA. Another group is soccer moms. Another group, every group is different, totally different. It's not a monolith. And when you find your group, it starts to become a part of your life, and that's when sobriety really starts to take hold. So anyway, my point is that with Johnny Depp, he seemed to exhibit, he talked the way someone talks way before they even cross the beginning steps of actual recovery and getting their life in order and realizing that they have a general problem. Now, I don't blame him because I think he's so traumatized from his childhood that he doesn't have any other way of coping that he knows of. Of course, there are other things, namely individual trauma recovery therapy and recovery groups as well. So without those other kinds of trauma recovery programs, I'm guessing it will be almost impossible for him not to use substances as a way of regulating, because I think that's all he has. And along those lines, he's been using for so long and so much that I think emotionally he is extremely stunted, as evidenced by what I think are credible accounts of his temper and him acting out. Even outside of Amber Heard, there were people saying those kinds of things. And not just Amber Heard's people, Ellen Barkin, for example, a long time ago. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.